The massive council chamber on Nexus Prime buzzed with alien voices. 12 different species sat around the enormous circular table, their forms casting strange shadows under the bright lights. The Vorthak representatives towered over everyone else, their crystalline armor gleaming like blue diamonds. Each one stood nearly 9 feet tall, their forearms ending in claws that could crush steel. Across from them, the Zephyrians moved like liquid mercury, their serpentine bodies coiling and uncoiling as they spoke through telepathic waves. Their scaled skin shimmered with colors that changed with their emotions. When they were angry, red patterns flashed across their bodies. When they were amused, soft yellow lights danced under their scales. The insectoid Kralliks clustered together. In their section, thousands of small creatures that shared one mind. They chittered and clicked in perfect unison, their 6 legs tapping rhythms on the metal floor. Each individual Kralliks was no bigger than a house cat, but together they formed a deadly swarm intelligence. Other species filled the remaining seats. The rock-like granite people sat perfectly still, their stone bodies unmoved by the discussions around them. The floating ethereals drifted above their chairs, their ghostly forms barely visible in the light. The savage Bloodfang warriors sharpened, their claws on the table edge, their predatory eyes scanning for threats. Admiral Kethter of the Vorthak military stood at the center of the chamber. His massive frame commanded attention as he activated a holographic display. Images of star charts and battle reports filled the air above the table. "Fellow council members," Kethter's voice boomed through the chamber, "we have received an application for membership in the Galactic Defense Alliance." He paused, his 4 eyes scanning the assembled delegates. "The application comes from a species called humans, from a small planet they call Earth." A ripple of interest moved through the chamber. New species rarely applied to join the Alliance. Most were either conquered or chose to remain isolated in their home systems. Commander Vexani, the lead Zephyrian strategist, raised her elegant head. Her scales flickered with curiosity as she spoke. "What are the military specifications of these humans? Are they warriors like the Bloodfang? Do they possess psychic abilities like our people?" Kethter's expression would have been a smile if the Vorthak had possessed the ability to smile. Instead, his eyes glowed brighter with amusement. "I think you will find their specifications quite interesting." The holographic display changed to show detailed biological scans of human beings. The assembled aliens leaned forward to examine the data. What they saw caused immediate reactions throughout the chamber. The Bloodfang warriors began to laugh, a sound like grinding metal. The Krallik swarm chittered with what could only be described as insect laughter. Even the normally stoic granite people showed signs of amusement by shifting slightly in their seats. Average height, 1.8 meters, Vexani read from the display, her voice filled with disbelief. No natural armor plating. No enhanced strength beyond baseline organic capability. No telepathic abilities. No regenerative healing, no natural weapons. The laughter grew louder. A Bloodfang warrior named Scartooth slammed his clawed fist on the table. "They are smaller than our children. How do they expect to fight in galactic warfare?" The Krallik swarm mind spoke in unison, their thousands of voices creating an eerie harmony. "Our individual units are stronger than these humans. They would be crushed beneath our smallest warriors." Kethter raised one of his massive hands for silence. "There is more. Their military designation is the Terran Defense Force. They have requested permission to establish a small outpost on the frontier world of Kepler 442b. The chamber erupted again. This time, the laughter was mixed with expressions of shock and disbelief. The idea that such weak creatures would want to establish a military presence on a frontier world seemed absurd. At that moment, the chamber doors opened. 3 figures entered, and the laughter died away as the aliens got their first look at actual humans. Colonel Jake Murphy walked in first, his uniform crisp and his bearing military straight. Behind him came Captain Lisa Torres and Lieutenant Sam Carter, both maintaining professional composure despite the obvious hostility in the room. The size difference was immediately apparent. Murphy stood barely 6 feet tall, reaching only the chest of the smallest Vorthek present. His skin looked pale and soft compared to the armored hides of the other species. His weapons were simple, projectile firearms, primitive compared to the energy weapons carried by the galactic powers. Torres and Carter flanked their colonel, their human forms appearing almost comically small in the vast chamber. Torres carried a data pad with Earth's military specifications, while Carter kept one hand near her sidearm, though the weapon would be useless against most of the beings present. "Honored council members," Murphy began, his voice clear and steady despite the intimidating audience. "I am Colonel Jake Murphy, representing the Terran Defense Force. We come before you today to request membership in the Galactic Defense Alliance." The response was immediate and brutal. Scartooth stood up, his massive frame towering over the human delegation. "You dare come before us with such weakness? Your entire species could not defeat a single Bloodfang pack," the Kralik swarm mind added, their voice to the mockery. "We have observed your planet. Your people fight among themselves with primitive weapons. You have no unity, no strength. You are prey, not predators." Even the normally diplomatic ethereals joined in the derision. Their ghostly leader, Whisperwind, floated closer to examine. "The humans, your life force is so dim. How do you expect to survive in the harsh reality of galactic conflict?" Murphy remained calm throughout the verbal assault. He had expected this reaction. Earth's intelligence services had warned him about the aggressive nature of galactic politics. Still, he had hoped for at least a fair hearing. "We may not possess the physical advantages of other species," Murphy replied, "but we have other qualities that make us valuable allies. We are adaptable, persistent, and skilled at working together despite our differences." This statement only provoked more laughter. The Granite people, who rarely spoke, rumbled their amusement. "Adaptable? You live on only one world. Persistent? Your species has existed for a mere fraction of galactic history. Working together? Our reports show constant warfare among your people." Vexani studied the humans with her telepathic senses, trying to read their emotions. What she found surprised her. Despite being surrounded by hostile aliens who could kill them without effort, the humans showed no fear. Instead, she sensed determination, calculation, and something else she could not quite identify. "You claim to be warriors," Vexani said, her scales flickering with confusion, "but you show no aggression. Your minds are calm, almost peaceful. How can peaceful beings be effective soldiers?" Murphy exchanged glances with his officers. This was the heart of the matter. How could they explain human nature to beings who had never encountered anything like it? "Peace and the ability to wage war are not opposites," Murphy said carefully. "A true warrior fights not because they enjoy violence, but because they must protect what they value. We humans have learned to be peaceful with each other so we can be more effective against our enemies." The chamber fell silent for a moment as the aliens processed this concept. Then the laughter resumed, even louder than before. Kethter stepped forward, his massive form casting a shadow over the human delegation. "Enough of this foolishness. The Galactic Defense Alliance cannot waste resources protecting a species that cannot protect itself. We vote to place Earth under protective custody as a client species. You will be defended by our forces, but you will not be permitted to participate in military operations." The vote was swift and unanimous. Not a single species voted to accept humans as military equals. The decision was final. Earth would be treated as a protected colony, not as an ally. As the council session ended, the aliens filed out of the chamber, still chuckling about the tiny army that had dared to request membership. None of them noticed the look that passed between Murphy, Torres, and Carter. It was not defeat they saw in each other's eyes, but determination. The galaxy had made its decision about humanity. Soon, they would learn how wrong they had been. 3 months had passed since the humiliating vote at the Galactic Council. The decision to treat Earth as a protected client species rather than a military ally still stung, but the humans had accepted their fate with characteristic determination. They would prove their worth through actions, Not words. Firebase Alpha sat on the rocky plains of Kepler 442b, a frontier world chosen specifically because it was considered safe enough for the delicate human species. The base looked modest, compared to the massive installations built by other galactic powers. Simple, prefabricated buildings arranged in efficient patterns. Surrounded by basic defensive walls and sensor arrays, Major Kate Williams stood on the observation deck of the command center watching her soldiers go through their morning routines. 200 humans called Firebase Alpha home, a tiny force by galactic standards. The Vorthak base 5 kilometers away housed over 10,000 warriors. The Zephyrian installation had 3,000 psychic soldiers. Even the Kralik swarm maintained 50,000 individual units at their nearby hive. Williams had been promoted after the council meeting, taking command of humanity's first off-world military installation. She was a practical woman with short brown hair and steady gray eyes. Her soldiers respected her because she led by example, never asking them to do anything she would not do herself. "Major Williams," came a voice from behind her. She turned to see Lieutenant Colonel Ryan Brooks approaching with his daily report. Brooks was tall and lean, with the kind of quiet confidence that came from years of military experience. "What's the situation, Ryan?" Williams asked, accepting the electronic tablet he offered. "Same as always," Brooks replied with a slight smile. "The Vorthak think we're playing soldier. The Zephyrians are polite but dismissive. The Kraliks ignore us completely unless they need something repaired." Williams nodded. This had been the pattern since their arrival. The alien forces treated the humans like helpful technicians rather than fellow soldiers. When equipment broke down, they called for human engineers. When they needed supplies transported, they asked for human logistics support. But when it came to actual military operations, the humans were politely excluded. "How did the joint training exercise go yesterday?" Williams asked. Brooks grimaced. "About as well as expected. War Chief Gorthmol brought his finest warriors to show us how real soldiers fight. They treated the whole thing like a demonstration rather than a learning opportunity. The previous day's training had been particularly frustrating. The Vorthak had insisted on a simple combat simulation: defend a strategic position against enemy attack. Their approach had been straightforward and predictable. Form a defensive line, use superior firepower to stop the enemy, then counterattack with overwhelming force. Brooks and his team had suggested alternative tactics. What if they used the terrain to their advantage? What if they created multiple fallback positions? What if they used deception to confuse the enemy about their true numbers? Gorthmol had laughed at these suggestions. "Tiny human," he had said, his forearms gesturing dismissively. "War is simple. Strong beats weak, big beats small. Complex thinking is for those too weak to win with strength." The Vorthak warriors had nodded in agreement. Their crystalline armor gleamed as they took their positions in perfect formation. When the simulated enemy attacked, they met them head-on with devastating firepower. The exercise ended quickly with a Vorthak victory, but Brooks could see the flaws in their approach. They won because the computer simulation was programmed for conventional warfare, Brooks explained to Williams. If a real enemy used unexpected tactics, the Vorthak would struggle to adapt. Williams understood the problem. The galactic powers had become set in their ways after centuries of fighting similar battles against similar enemies. They had developed tactics that worked against other galactic species, but they had never faced an enemy that thought completely differently. Across the base, Dr. Amy Peterson was having similar frustrations in her own field. Peterson was a xenobiologist who had been assigned to study the various alien species and their capabilities. Her work was supposed to help humanity understand their new galactic neighbors, but the aliens showed little interest in her findings. Peterson sat in her small laboratory, reviewing data on Drakari energy signatures that had been detected at the edge of the sector. The readings were concerning, suggesting a massive military buildup in unexplored space. She had tried to share this information with her alien counterparts, but they had dismissed her concerns. "The Drakari are myths," Commander Vexani had told her during their last meeting. Ancient stories told to frighten children. Our psychic abilities would detect any real threat long before it became dangerous. Peterson knew better. The energy readings were real, and they were growing stronger. Something was building in the darkness beyond the frontier, and the aliens were too confident in their own abilities to take the threat seriously. Captain Steve Morrison's reconnaissance team had been tracking the energy signatures for weeks. Morrison was a skilled scout who had volunteered for the most dangerous missions on Earth. His team consisted of 6 specialists who could move through hostile territory without being detected, unlike the alien scouts who relied on advanced technology or psychic abilities. Morrison's team used old-fashioned fieldcraft. They understood how to read the land, how to move silently, and how to remain hidden for days at a time. These skills had been developed during countless human conflicts throughout history. The signatures are definitely artificial, Morrison reported to Williams during their evening briefing. Whatever's out there, it's not natural. The energy patterns suggest massive construction projects, possibly shipyards or weapons facilities. Williams studied the data on her screen. The readings came from a region called the Void Sector, an area of space that had been declared off-limits by the Galactic Council. The official reason was that it contained unstable stellar phenomena, but Peterson's analysis suggested something else entirely. "Have you shared this with the Joint Command?" Williams asked. Morrison nodded grimly. "They're not interested. The Vorthaks say their sensors would detect any real threat. The Zephyrians claim their psychic network would warn them of danger. The Kralliks insist their swarm intelligence would know if something was wrong." This was the problem with the alien forces. Each species believed their particular advantage made them superior to all others. The Vorthak trusted their strength and technology. The Zephyrians relied on their psychic abilities. The Kralliks counted on their numbers and hive mind. None of them seemed to understand that different kinds of intelligence might be needed for different kinds of problems. Sergeant Alex Davis had experienced this firsthand during patrol missions. Davis was a quiet man who had grown up hunting in the forests of Montana. He understood patience and observation in ways that the alien soldiers could not comprehend. During a recent joint patrol, Davis had noticed signs of unusual activity near the sector boundary. Disturbed dust patterns, unusual electromagnetic readings, and subtle changes in local wildlife behavior. When he reported these observations to the Vorthak patrol leader, he was told to focus on important matters. "You see danger in everything, tiny human," the Vorthak warrior had said. "This is why your species needs protection. You jump at shadows while we watch for real threats." But Davis knew the difference between paranoia and caution. His instincts had kept him alive through multiple combat deployments on Earth. Those same instincts were now telling him that something was very wrong in the Void Sector. The human engineers were facing their own challenges. Captain Nick Johnson's technical team had been assigned to maintain alien equipment, but they were not allowed to modify or improve it. The aliens viewed their technology as perfect and saw no need for human input. Johnson disagreed. He could see dozens of ways to improve the efficiency and reliability of alien systems. The Vorthak equipment was powerful but wasteful. The Zephyrian technology was elegant but fragile. The Krallik systems were numerous but poorly coordinated. "If they would just let us help," Johnson explained to his team, "we could make their equipment twice as effective. But they think we're too primitive to understand their advanced technology." The irony was not lost on the humans. They had been assigned to maintain equipment they supposedly could not understand, while being forbidden from improving equipment they could clearly make better. Lieutenant Sam Carter's Marine platoon had been relegated to base security duty. The aliens considered this appropriate work for humans, since it did not involve real combat. Carter's Marines were skilled soldiers who had trained for years in the most advanced military techniques Earth had developed, but the aliens saw only their size and apparent frailty. They could not understand that human soldiers were trained to think as well as fight, to adapt to changing situations, and to work as a team rather than as individuals. As the weeks passed, The humans at Firebase Alpha began to realize that they were facing two challenges. The first was proving their worth to their alien allies. The second was the growing threat from the void sector that only they seemed to recognize. The first sign of disaster came at 0347 hours Galactic Standard Time. The communication array at Firebase Alpha suddenly came alive with emergency signals from across the sector. Major Kate Williams rushed to the command center, still pulling on her uniform jacket as alarms blared throughout the base. "What's happening?" Williams demanded as she reached the communications station. Sergeant Alex Davis was already at his post, his face pale as he monitored the incoming messages. "Multiple distress calls, Major. The Zephyrian colony at Cytera is under attack. Heavy casualties reported." Williams felt her blood run cold. Cytera was supposed to be one of the most secure worlds in the sector. The Zephyrian psychic warriors had claimed their mental abilities made them impossible to surprise. If they were calling for help, something had gone very wrong. "Get me a direct line to Commander Vexani," Williams ordered. The connection crackled with static and interference. When Vexani's voice finally came through, it was filled with panic and disbelief. "Human base, this is Cytera Command. We are under attack by unknown forces. Our psychic abilities have no effect on them. They are immune to our mental powers." Williams exchanged glances with Lieutenant Colonel Ryan Brooks, who had just arrived in the command center. This was exactly what Dr. Amy Peterson had been warning about. The energy signatures from the void sector had been real, and now something was using them to launch attacks. "Commander Vexani, what can you tell us about the attackers?" Williams asked. "They are massive, 12 feet tall, covered in natural armor that deflects our weapons. Their technology is superior to ours. They call themselves the Drakari Empire." Vexani's voice broke with static. "We cannot read their minds. They are shielded from our abilities. We are defenseless against them." The transmission cut out abruptly, leaving the command center in stunned silence. The Zephyrians had always claimed their psychic powers made them the ultimate warriors. Now they were being destroyed by an enemy they could not even affect. Within hours, more reports flooded in. The Drakari Empire had launched a coordinated attack across multiple star systems. Their massive reptilian warriors were 12 feet tall with thick scales that served as natural armor. Their regenerative abilities meant they could heal from wounds that would kill other species. Admiral Kethra's voice boomed across the emergency communication network as he tried to coordinate the Vorthek response. "All Vorthek forces converge on the Helix Nebula. We will show these Drakari what true strength looks like." The Vorthek had always been the most physically powerful species in the galaxy. Their crystalline armor was nearly indestructible, and their four-armed warriors could tear apart most enemies with their bare hands. If anyone could stop the Drakari through brute force, it would be the Vorthek. But the reports from the Helix Nebula shattered that confidence. The Drakari warriors were not only larger than the Vorthek, they were also more experienced in combat. Their plasma weapons cut through crystalline armor like paper, and their ancient military tactics had been refined through countless conquests. "Vorthek fleet taking heavy losses," came the desperate transmission from the battle zone. "Enemy technology superior to ours. They have been preparing for this war for centuries. We cannot match their firepower." The proud Vorthek warriors, who had dominated galactic warfare for generations, found themselves outmatched by an enemy that surpassed them in every way. Their greatest strength had become meaningless against opponents who were simply stronger. The Kralik swarm mine made its own attempt to stop the invasion. Millions of insectoid warriors launched themselves at the Drakari forces, confident that their numbers would overwhelm any enemy. The Kraliks had never met a foe that could withstand their massive swarms. The battle at the Centauri belt became a massacre. The Drakari possessed area effect weapons that turned the Kraliks' greatest asset into a fatal weakness. Single shots eliminated thousands of the small creatures, and their hive minds suffered catastrophic damage as entire sections of their collective consciousness were destroyed. "Swarm mind compromised," the surviving Kraliks transmitted in their eerie unison. Numbers insufficient against enemy weapons. Cannot compute effective strategy against superior technology. One by one, the great military powers of the galaxy fell before the Drakari advance. The granite people tried to use their stone-like durability, but found their rocky bodies crumbled under Drakari plasma fire. The ethereals discovered that their ghostly forms offered no protection against weapons designed to affect energy beings. The Bloodfang warriors fought with savage fury, but were systematically eliminated by enemies, who have been waging war since. Before their species learned to use tools, every advantage the galactic powers had relied upon proved useless against the ancient Drakari Empire. Captain Steve Morrison watched the tactical displays with growing horror. His reconnaissance team had been tracking the Drakari buildup for weeks, but even they had not imagined the scale of the invasion. Entire star systems were falling within days. How many ships do they have? Morrison asked Dr. Peterson, who was analyzing the enemy force composition. Peterson shook her head grimly. Our estimates suggest at least 50,000 warships, possibly more. They have been preparing for this invasion for decades, maybe centuries. Every ship is larger and more advanced than anything we have seen. The Drakari were not just another galactic power. They were an ancient empire that had been watching and planning while the younger species fought among themselves. Their technology was the result of millennia of conquest and refinement. Their warriors were veterans of hundreds of successful invasions. News of the disasters spread panic throughout the remaining galactic territories. The species that had once mocked humanity's weakness now faced their own extinction. The Vorthic, Zephyrians, and Kraliks had built their military doctrines around fighting enemies similar to themselves. None of them knew how to face an opponent that was superior in every conventional measure. On Firebase Alpha, the humans watched the reports with professional interest mixed with growing concern. They had been excluded from the galactic military hierarchy, but they were still part of the sector's defensive network. If the Drakari continued their advance, the human base would eventually be targeted. Major Williams, came an urgent call from the communications station. Priority transmission from the Galactic Council. Williams activated the main screen, expecting to see the usual confident faces of the alien leadership. Instead, she found herself looking at beings she barely recognized. The proud Vorthak looked defeated, their crystalline armor cracked and dim. The elegant Zephyrians appeared confused and frightened, their scales flickering with panic colors. Human. Commander, Admiral Kether's voice was barely above a whisper. We require immediate assistance. Our forces have been decimated. Traditional military tactics have proven ineffective against the Drakari Empire. The irony was not lost on Williams. The same council that had voted to place humanity under protective custody was now begging for help from the tiny army they had dismissed. We are transmitting all available intelligence on the Drakari forces, Commander Vexani added, her mental voice strained with exhaustion. Perhaps your species can find weaknesses that we have missed. Williams looked around the command center. At her officers. These were the same people who had been told they were too weak to participate in galactic warfare. Now they were being asked to save the galaxy from an enemy that had defeated every major military power. Understood, Council, Williams replied formally. We will review the intelligence and provide whatever assistance we can. The transmission ended, leaving the human command staff in thoughtful silence. They had been preparing for this moment since their arrival on Kepler 442b, but the scale of the crisis was beyond anything they had imagined. Captain Nick Johnson spoke first, his engineering mind already working on the problem. The Drakari are using conventional superiority tactics. Bigger ships, stronger weapons, thicker armor. They are beating our allies at their own game. Lieutenant Sam Carter nodded agreement. But conventional superiority only works if your enemy fights conventionally. The aliens have been trying to match the Drakari strength for strength. That's not how humans fight. Dr. Peterson pulled up the intelligence data on her screen. The Drakari have been successful because they have planned for fighting other galactic species. They know how Vorthic warriors think, how Zephyrian psychics operate, how Kralik swarms move. They have counters for every conventional tactic. William studied the data with growing understanding. The Drukhari were like a perfectly evolved predator, adapted to hunt specific prey. They had spent centuries learning how to defeat the galactic powers, and their invasion was the result of that planning. But they don't know how humans fight, William said quietly. They have never encountered our tactics because the galaxy has never seen our tactics. We might be the unknown variable they have not planned for. Brooks leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. The question is whether we can make a difference. We have 200 soldiers against an empire of millions. Even if we think differently, can we actually affect the outcome? The transformation at Firebase Alpha was immediate and startling. Within hours of receiving the desperate plea from the Galactic Council, the small human base became a hive of purposeful activity. Major Kate Williams stood in the command center, watching her officers work with the calm efficiency that had been mocked by their alien allies just days before. "Status report," Williams requested as Lieutenant Colonel Ryan Brooks approached with a data pad. "All personnel are ready for deployment," Brooks replied. "Captain Morrison's reconnaissance team has identified 3 possible targets for our first operation. Dr. Peterson has completed her analysis of Drukhari weaknesses, and Captain Johnson's engineers have finished modifying our equipment." Williams nodded, impressed by how quickly her people had adapted to the crisis. While the alien forces had panicked and fallen into chaos, the humans had simply gone to work. This was what they had been trained for throughout their military careers on Earth. The first hint of human capability came from an unexpected source. Sergeant Alex Davis had volunteered to lead a scouting mission to the contested mining station on asteroid X7. The Drukhari had captured the facility 3 days earlier, and every attempt to retake it had failed. Davis and his small team approached the asteroid using methods that confused both the Drukhari defenders and the watching alien observers. Instead of attacking directly or using advanced technology, the humans employed patience and natural stealth. Davis had grown up hunting in the mountains of Colorado. He understood how to move through hostile territory without being detected, how to read the signs of enemy movement, and how to remain hidden for hours at a time. These skills had nothing to do with advanced weapons or psychic powers. The team spent 2 full days observing the mining station from concealed positions. They watched the Drukhari patrol patterns, noted the locations of sensor equipment, and identified weaknesses in the defensive setup. The aliens monitoring the mission grew impatient, expecting the humans to either attack or retreat. What are they waiting for? War Chief Gorthmal demanded over the communication channel. The enemy grows stronger while they hide like scared animals, but Davis was not hiding from fear. He was gathering intelligence and waiting for the right moment. Human military doctrine emphasized preparation over aggression, understanding over brute force. When Davis finally moved, every step had been carefully planned. The attack came at dawn during the shift change between Drukhari guard units. Davis and his team had identified a 12-minute window when the station's security was at its weakest. They moved like shadows, using the asteroid's natural rock formations to mask their approach. What happened next shocked the observers. The humans did not try to match Drukhari's strength with superior firepower. Instead, they used confusion and misdirection. Sergeant Maya Lopez's squad created false sensor readings that made the defenders think they were under attack from multiple directions. Lieutenant Ben Clark's team used smoke grenades and mirror devices to create illusions, making their small force appear much larger than it actually was. The Drukhari, who had been expecting conventional tactics, found themselves fighting an enemy they could not see or understand. The psychological warfare was particularly effective. Lopez's team had studied recordings of Drukhari communications and learned to mimic their distress calls. They broadcast these sounds throughout the mining station, creating panic among defenders who thought their own warriors were being slaughtered. Within 6 hours, the mining station was back in Allied hands. The Drukhari garrison had been eliminated or captured, and the facility was operational again. The alien observers could barely believe what they had witnessed. How did they do that with so few soldiers? Commander Vexani asked during the post-mission briefing. Her scales flickered with confusion as she tried to understand human tactics. Captain Steve Morrison, who had coordinated the operation, smiled slightly. We did not try to be stronger than the enemy. We tried to be smarter. The Drukhari were prepared to fight Vorthic warriors or Zephyrian psychics. They were not prepared to fight humans. This success marked the beginning of a new phase in the war. For the first time since the invasion began, an allied force had defeated the Drukhari without suffering heavy casualties. The humans had proven that the ancient empire was not invincible. Colonel Jake Murphy arrived at Firebase Alpha the next day with reinforcements and new orders from Earth. The success at Asteroid 10-7 had convinced the human high command to commit more resources to the galactic war effort. Murphy brought with him 50 additional specialists, including combat engineers, communications experts, and psychological warfare officers. More importantly, he brought a new understanding of how humans could contribute to the larger conflict. The aliens have been trying to fight the Drukhari on their own terms, Murphy explained to Williams and her staff. Strength against strength. Technology against technology. But wars are not won by matching the enemy's advantages. They are won by exploiting the enemy's weaknesses. Dr. Amy Peterson had spent weeks analyzing Drukhari behavior patterns and military doctrine. Her findings revealed something that the alien forces had missed. The Drukhari Empire was built on rigid hierarchy and predetermined strategies. They are excellent at executing planned operations, Peterson explained to the assembled officers. Their success comes from centuries of careful preparation and superior resources, but they struggle to adapt when faced with unexpected situations. This was the key insight that would change everything. The Drukhari had defeated the galactic powers because they had studied them for centuries. They knew how Vorthic warriors would attack, how Zephyrian psychics would coordinate, how Kralik swarms would move. Every alien tactic had been anticipated and countered, but the Drukhari had never encountered humans in combat. They had no experience with human unpredictability, adaptability, and refusal to follow conventional military wisdom. The humans represented something completely new in galactic warfare. Captain Nick Johnson's engineering team demonstrated this principle by retrofitting captured Drukhari equipment. The aliens had always assumed that enemy technology was either superior or inferior to their own. They tried to copy successful designs or develop countermeasures for threatening ones. The humans took a different approach. They modified Drukhari plasma weapons to be more portable, even though this reduced their power. They changed Drukhari armor to be lighter and more flexible, sacrificing protection for mobility. They turned Drukhari communication devices into jamming equipment. This makes no sense, protested a Vorthic engineer who was observing the modifications. You are making their equipment weaker, not stronger. Johnson smiled as he adjusted a plasma rifle's power settings. We are not trying to make it stronger. We are trying to make it useful for our tactics. A weapon that hits hard but moves slowly is useless if you cannot get close enough to use it. The concept of deliberately reducing capability to gain advantage was foreign to the alien mindset. They always sought maximum power, maximum protection, maximum efficiency. The idea of accepting limitations in exchange for flexibility was revolutionary. Lieutenant Sam Carter's Marine platoon provided another example of human tactical thinking. When assigned to defend a supply depot against Drukhari attack, Carter did not follow standard defensive doctrine. Instead of creating a strong perimeter and waiting for the enemy to attack, she prepared multiple fallback positions. The Drukhari assault began with their usual overwhelming force. They expected to break through the defenses quickly and capture the depot within hours. Instead, they found themselves fighting a retreating enemy that struck back from unexpected positions. Carter's Marines gave ground slowly, making the Drukhari pay for every meter of advance. They used booby traps, ambush tactics, and coordinated retreats to wear down the attacking force. By the time the Drukhari reached the depot, they were exhausted and demoralized. The humans fight like cowards, complained the Drukhari commander over intercepted communications. They run away instead of standing and fighting like warriors. But Carter was not running away. She was drawing the enemy into a carefully prepared kill zone where her Marines had every advantage. When the final battle began, the Drukhari found themselves surrounded and outmaneuvered by an enemy they had thought was defeated. The success of these early operations began to change attitudes throughout the Allied forces. The alien commanders, who had dismissed human capabilities, were forced to acknowledge that the tiny army was achieving results where their own forces had failed. War Chief Gorthmal visited Firebase Alpha to observe human training methods. He watched human soldiers practice scenarios that emphasized adaptability and quick thinking rather than raw strength or advanced technology. "Your warriors are small and weak," Gorthmal observed, "but they think in ways we do not understand. How do you train them to be so unpredictable?" Williams considered the question carefully. "We do not train them to be unpredictable. We train them to solve problems. Every human soldier learns to adapt to changing situations, to work with limited resources, and to find new solutions when old ones fail." The transformation of the galactic war effort was remarkable to witness. Within 2 weeks of the first human victories, Colonel Jake Murphy found himself in a position he never could have imagined. The same Galactic Council that had voted to place Earth under protective custody now unanimously appointed him Supreme Allied Commander. Murphy stood in the main briefing room of the former Vorthak Command Center, looking at a tactical display that showed the current state of the war. Red markers indicated Drukhari-controlled systems, while blue showed Allied territory. The red vastly outnumbered the blue, but for the first time since the invasion began, the red was no longer expanding. "Status report from all sectors," Murphy requested, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had impressed even the most skeptical alien commanders. Captain Lisa Torres stepped forward with her datapad. She had been promoted to Murphy's chief of staff after demonstrating an exceptional ability to coordinate between human and alien forces. Sector 7 reports successful defense of the Rigel station. Sector 12 has completed the evacuation of civilian populations from the outer colonies. Sector 4 is ready to begin the counteroffensive operations. The change in military effectiveness was dramatic. Before human involvement, Allied forces had been losing an average of 3-star systems per day. Now, the Drukhari advance had been completely stopped, and in some areas, Allied forces were actually regaining territory. The key was not just human tactics, but human ability to teach those tactics to others. Captain Torres had developed new training programs that combined human strategic thinking with alien natural abilities. Instead of trying to make aliens fight like humans, she taught them to use their own strengths in unexpected ways. The Vorthak warriors were learning that their superior strength could be used for hit-and-run attacks rather than frontal assaults. War Chief Gorthmal had initially resisted this concept, claiming it was dishonorable for mighty warriors to retreat from battle. "Honor means victory," Torres had explained patiently. "If you can destroy 10 enemy units by attacking and retreating, that is more honorable than destroying 3 units by standing and fighting until you die." The logic was simple, but it required a complete change in Vorthak thinking. They had been raised to believe that courage meant never backing down from a fight. Learning to retreat as part of a larger strategy was one of the hardest lessons for proud warriors to accept, but the results spoke for themselves. Gorthmal's strike teams were now eliminating Drukhari outposts with minimal casualties. They would hit hard, cause maximum damage, and disappear before the enemy could organize a counterattack. The Vorthak were discovering that strategic thinking enhanced their natural abilities rather than replacing them. The Zephyrians were undergoing their own transformation under human guidance. Commander Vexani had learned to use her telepathic abilities for coordination and communication rather than direct combat. Human advisors had shown her how to create communication networks that were immune to Drukhari jamming. "Your psychic powers are wasted in trying to attack shielded mines," Dr. Amy Peterson had explained. "But they are invaluable for coordinating complex operations across multiple battlefields simultaneously." The Zephyrians were now serving as the nervous system of the Allied forces. Their telepathic networks allowed for instant communication between units separated by vast distances. They could coordinate attacks with precision that amazed even their human advisors, the Krolloks. Swarm mind had perhaps made the most dramatic adaptation to human tactics. Instead of using their millions of units in massive frontal assaults, they had learned to operate in small, specialized teams. The hive mind could now control thousands of separate operations. Simultaneously, Lieutenant Sam Carter worked closely with the Krolloks commanders to develop new swarm tactics. The insects were naturally suited for infiltration and sabotage missions that would be impossible for larger species. Their small size, which had been a disadvantage in direct combat, became an asset in covert operations. Think of yourselves as 1,000 surgical instruments instead of one giant hammer, Carter had told them during training. A hammer can break down a wall, but a scalpel can disable an entire enemy base by cutting the right wires. The Krolloks were now conducting sabotage missions throughout Drukhari territory. Their small units could infiltrate enemy installations, plant explosives, and escape without being detected. The psychological effect on Drukhari forces was significant, as they never knew when or where the next attack would come. The most dramatic demonstration of the new Allied capabilities came during the siege of Rigel Station. The strategic outpost controlled access to 3 major shipping lanes, making it a crucial target for both sides. The Drukhari had committed a massive force to capture the station, confident that their superior numbers would ensure victory. Private First Class Tyler Brown found himself at the center of the longest continuous battle of the war. Brown was a quiet young man from rural Texas who had joined the military to see the galaxy. He had never expected to become a symbol of human endurance, but that was exactly what happened during the 3-week siege. The Drukhari attacked Rigel Station with waves of warriors that seemed endless. Their strategy was simple: overwhelm the defenders through constant pressure until exhaustion and casualties forced a surrender. This approach had worked on dozens of previous targets, but they had not encountered human stubbornness before. Brown and his mixed unit of human Marines and alien soldiers held their positions for days without relief. When food ran low, they shared rations. When ammunition ran short, they salvaged weapons from fallen enemies. When exhaustion threatened to overcome them, they took turns sleeping while others maintained watch. The alien soldiers in Brown's unit were amazed by human endurance. Vorthok warriors were stronger than humans, but they needed regular rest periods to maintain their strength. Zephyrian psychics were more mentally agile, but prolonged stress exhausted their telepathic abilities. Krolloks units could work continuously, but they required frequent coordination. Updates from their hive mind. Humans seemed able to function indefinitely under adverse conditions. They adapted to irregular sleep, improvised solutions to equipment failures, and maintained morale even when the situation appeared hopeless. Most importantly, they refused to give up even when logic suggested that surrender was the only option. "How do they keep fighting?" asked the captured Drukhari officer during interrogation. "Our calculations show that their position became untenable. 5 days ago, why do they not acknowledge defeat?" The answer lay in something the Drukhari had never encountered in their centuries of conquest. Every other species they had faced possessed some form of rational cost-benefit analysis in their decision-making. When losses exceeded acceptable levels, they would retreat or surrender to preserve their remaining forces. Humans operated by different rules. They fought not just for strategic objectives, but for principles that could not be calculated in terms of acceptable losses. The concept of never giving up, regardless of odds, was foreign to the Drukhari understanding of warfare. Captain Steve Morrison's intelligence network was providing crucial support for the siege defenders. Morrison had spent weeks developing contacts among the local population and establishing supply lines that the Drukhari could not detect. "The enemy controls the space around Rigel Station," Morrison reported to Murphy during a secure communication. "But they do not understand civilian populations. They think in terms of military targets and ignore the people who actually live here." This was another area where human experience proved valuable. Earth's long history of guerrilla warfare had taught humans how to work with civilian populations. In occupied territory, they understood that local people could provide intelligence, supplies, and support that made the difference between victory and defeat. Morrison's network smuggled food, medical supplies, and ammunition to the besieged. Stationed using methods that baffled the Drakari, civilian traders, maintenance workers, and even children carried small packages through security checkpoints without detection. The Drakari, focused on military threats, never suspected that their enemies were receiving help from ordinary people. The psychological impact of the Rigel Station siege extended far beyond the immediate battle. Across the galaxy, both Allied and Drakari forces were watching to see if the tiny human force could really hold out. Against overwhelming odds, when the siege finally ended after 3 weeks, it was not because the defenders had been defeated. Instead, the Drakari commander ordered a withdrawal, stating that the cost of taking the station had become unacceptable. For the first time in their military history, the Drakari Empire had given up on a strategic objective because the defenders refused to surrender. The victory at Rigel Station marked a turning point in galactic opinion about human capabilities. The species that had been dismissed as too weak for military service had just demonstrated a level of determination that impressed even their enemies. Commander Vexani visited Brown and his surviving defenders after the siege ended. Her scales shimmered with deep respect as she addressed the exhausted soldiers. "We have underestimated your species greatly. You have shown us that true strength comes not from natural abilities, but from the refusal to accept defeat." The final battle for the galaxy began at dawn on the 15th day of the 3rd month since the human intervention started. The Drakari Empire had gathered every available ship and warrior for one massive assault on the Omega sector, where the Allied Command Center was located. Their plan was simple: destroy the human leadership and watch the resistance collapse. Supreme Allied Commander Jake Murphy stood in the command center aboard the captured Drakari battleship that now served as his flagship. The irony was not lost on him that he was directing the defense from an enemy vessel that his forces had taken through cunning rather than firepower. "Enemy fleet composition confirmed," reported Captain Lisa Torres, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the approaching threat. 15,000 Drakari warships, including 12 Dreadnought-class vessels. Estimated warrior complement, 2 million troops. The numbers were staggering. Even with all the Allied forces combined, they were outnumbered 10 to 1. By every conventional measure, the battle should have been over before it began. But Murphy had learned that conventional measures did not apply when humans were involved. "All units, this is Murphy," he announced over the galaxy-wide communication network. "Operation Endgame is now active. Remember, we are not trying to match their strength. We are going to make them fight our kind of war." The plan that Murphy and his staff had developed was unlike anything attempted in galactic history. Instead of meeting the Drakari fleet in traditional ship-to-ship combat, the Allies would use every lesson learned from months of human-inspired tactics. General Marcus Thompson, who had arrived from Earth with additional reinforcements, coordinated the ground operations. Thompson was a veteran of numerous conflicts who understood that wars were won by achieving objectives, not by destroying enemies. "Phase 1 is complete," Thompson reported as the first part of the operation began. "Civilian evacuation successful. All non-combatants have been moved to secure locations." This was a crucial difference between human and Drakari strategy. The Drakari focused on destroying military targets and breaking enemy morale through civilian casualties. The humans prioritized saving lives, which freed their forces to take risks that would otherwise be unacceptable. Sergeant Alex Davis led the first strike team to infiltrate the Drakari command ship. Davis and his specially trained squad had learned to move through heavily defended areas using patience, stealth, and intimate knowledge of enemy patterns. The infiltration took 18 hours of careful movement through the massive vessel. Davis and his team avoided direct confrontation, instead focusing on gathering intelligence and identifying key weaknesses in the Drakari command structure. Target confirmed. Davis whispered into his communication device as his team reached the ship's central command section. The Drakari use a rigid hierarchy system. All orders flow from the Supreme War Commander. If we can disrupt their command chain, their entire fleet will lose coordination. This intelligence confirmed what Dr. Amy Peterson had predicted from her analysis of Drakari behavior. The ancient empire's greatest strength was also its greatest weakness. Their efficiency came from centralized control, but this made them vulnerable to targeted strikes against key leaders. Captain Steve Morrison's intelligence network had identified the location of the Drakari Supreme War Commander's flagship. The massive vessel, called the Eternal Conquest, served as the brain of the entire invasion fleet. Every tactical decision flowed from its command center. "Multiple strike teams are in position," Morrison reported to Murphy. "We have assets aboard 17 different Drakari ships, including the primary target. The enemy has no idea we are already inside their formation." The Drakari had made a critical error in their planning. They had prepared for external attacks from Allied warships, but they had not considered the possibility of infiltration teams already being aboard their vessels before the battle began. Human Special Forces had spent weeks preparing for this moment. They had studied captured Drakari equipment, learned to mimic enemy communication protocols, and developed ways to move through Drakari ships without triggering security systems. Lieutenant Sam Carter coordinated the simultaneous strikes from her position aboard the Allied command ship. Carter had worked with teams from every Allied species to create a coordinated assault that would begin at exactly the same moment across the entire enemy fleet. "All teams report ready," Carter announced. "Strike commences in 30 seconds. The attack began not with massive explosions or dramatic space battles, but with quiet acts of sabotage throughout the Drakari fleet. Human teams disabled communication systems, cut power lines, and planted charges in critical locations. Alien allies provided support using their specialized abilities in ways the Drakari had never encountered. Vorthok warriors used their strength to tear apart armored bulkheads, creating unexpected entry points for follow-up teams. Zephyrian psychics jammed internal communications while providing coordination for the Allied forces. Kralik swarms infiltrated ventilation systems and maintenance tunnels, carrying small explosives to precise locations. The effect was immediate and devastating. The Drakari fleet, which had been moving in perfect formation toward the Allied positions, suddenly erupted in chaos. Ships collided as their navigation systems failed. Commanders lost contact with their subordinates as communication networks collapsed. "Enemy fleet cohesion breaking down," reported Captain Nick Johnson from his position monitoring Drakari frequencies. "Multiple ships requesting assistance. Command structure compromised." But the most important target was still the Eternal Conquest. Davis and his team had reached the ship's command center, where they found something that shocked even the experienced soldiers. The Drakari Supreme War Commander was not the ancient, battle-hardened veteran they had expected. Instead, they found a relatively young officer who had inherited his position through bloodline rather than experience. The Drakari Empire's confidence in their own superiority had led them to promote based on ancestry rather than ability. "This explains everything," Davis whispered to his team as they observed the command center. "They have been winning through superior resources and technology, not superior leadership. Their commanders have never faced a real challenge." The realization changed everything about the final phase of the operation. Instead of trying to capture or kill the Supreme War Commander, Davis made a different choice. He decided to let the Drakari leader live to see the consequences of his decisions. "Charges placed on all critical systems," Davis reported. "Detonation will disable the ship's ability to coordinate fleet operations, but will not cause casualties among the crew." This decision reflected the fundamental difference between human and Drakari approaches to warfare. The Drakari sought to destroy their enemies completely. The humans sought to achieve their objectives with minimal loss of life, even enemy lives. When the charges detonated throughout the Drakari fleet, the result was not mass destruction but mass confusion. Ships found themselves unable to communicate, navigate, or coordinate their weapon systems. The mighty invasion fleet became a collection of individual vessels struggling to function without central guidance. Private First Class Tyler Brown, the hero of the Rigel Station siege, found himself leading a boarding party onto a disabled Drakari cruiser. Brown's reputation for refusing to give up had inspired soldiers throughout the Allied forces. "Surrender now, and you will be treated fairly," Brown announced to the Drakari crew over their own communication system. "Continue fighting, and you will face the consequences." The psychological impact of the coordinated strikes was overwhelming. Drakari warriors who had never experienced defeat suddenly found themselves facing enemies who seemed to appear from nowhere and disappear just as quickly. Their technology, which had always given them advantages, was now turned against them. Throughout the Omega sector, Drakari ships began surrendering rather than face continued sabotage and infiltration. The ancient empire that had conquered dozens of star systems was experiencing something they had never encountered: total tactical defeat by a supposedly inferior enemy. The final moment came when the Supreme War Commander himself requested terms of surrender. Murphy accepted the communication from the bridge of his captured flagship, surrounded by the officers who had been dismissed as a tiny army just months before. "I am Supreme War Commander Thakmur of the Eternal Conquest," came the transmission. "I request negotiation for the cessation of hostilities." Murphy looked around at his staff, seeing the quiet satisfaction in their faces. They had proven something important, not just to the galaxy but to themselves. Size and strength were not the only measures of military effectiveness. "This is Supreme Allied Commander Murphy," he replied formally. "I accept your request for negotiations. All Drakari forces will cease military operations immediately and prepare for inspection by Allied teams." The war was over, but the real victory was not the defeat of the Drakari Empire. The real victory was the transformation of galactic military thinking. The species that had ruled through superior strength and technology had learned that adaptability and determination could overcome any advantage.